The ad seemed too good to be true. Night shift maintenance worker needed for a luxury resort. High pay, all meals provided, no experience required. It sounded perfect. With rent overdue and my savings dwindling, I didn't think twice before applying. The resort was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest, and accessible only by a winding, poorly paved road. My GPS had given up long before I arrived, and the faded sign at the entrance, Pine Hollow Resort, did little to inspire confidence. What had once been a thriving luxury destination now stood forgotten, its grandeur faded and overtaken by time. When I pulled into the empty parking lot, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no wind, not even the hum of distant traffic. Just silence. The main building was enormous, its towering structure casting long shadows in the setting sun. The windows were dark, and the lights above the entrance flickered faintly. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew. The lobby must have been breathtaking once. Ornate chandeliers, marble floors, and sweeping stalkhouses. But now it felt hollow, like a shell of its former self. A lone desk sat at the far end, where a man in his late 50s waited, his posture rigid. "You must be Alex," he said, his voice low and clipped. He didn't offer a handshake, just a clipboard with a pen attached. "Sign here." I hesitated, scanning the document. It was a standard employment contract, but at the bottom, in bold letters, was a note. "Failure to comply with all instructions will result in immediate termination." "Instructions?" I asked, handing the clipboard back. He nodded toward a stack of papers on the desk. "The rules. Read them carefully." The word rules prickled at the back of my mind, but I pushed the thought aside and picked up the sheet. There were 5 of them, typed neatly in black ink. "Do not leave your room after 2 a.m. If you hear footsteps in the hallway, remain silent. Do not use the elevator between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Never go near the pool at night. If anyone knocks on your door after 2 a.m., do not open it." I glanced at the man, expecting some kind of explanation, but his expression was unreadable. "Is this serious?" I asked. "Very," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." Before I could press further, he handed me a key. "Room 217. Your shift starts tonight." The room was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a winding staircase that creaked underfoot. The hallway was dimly lit, the carpets faded and worn. My door was at the far end, and when I stepped inside, the room felt unnervingly normal. A bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the empty pool below. As night fell, I unpacked my things and prepared for my first shift. The rules sat on the desk, glaring at me like a silent warning. I told myself they were just precautions, some eccentricity of the resort's management. But as the clock struck midnight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The first night at Pine Hollow had begun. The first few hours of my shift were uneventful. The resort was massive, but it felt like no one had set foot there in years. My tasks were simple. Check the locks, ensure the emergency lights were working, and report any damage to the main desk. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. By 1 a.m., I had made my rounds and returned to my room. I sat at the desk, flipping through the employee manual, but my eyes kept drifting to the list of rules. They sat on the corner of the desk, their stark black letters feeling more ominous with every glance. "Do not leave your room after 2 a.m. That one stuck with me the most. The phrasing wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. I tried to brush off the unease, telling myself it was just company policy, meant to add a sense of mystique to the resort. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. The place felt wrong. As the clock ticked closer to 2 a.m., I decided to call it a night. I locked my door, double-checked it, and climbed into bed. The silence outside was thick, pressing against the walls like an unseen force. Then, at precisely 2:15 a.m., I heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, a soft tapping on the carpeted floor, but they grew louder with each passing second. My heart began to race. If you hear footsteps in the hallway, remain silent. The rule replayed in my mind like a mantra. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as the footsteps approached my door. They stopped directly in front of it. A chill ran down my spine. I could feel the presence on the other side of the door, heavy and unnatural. The doorknob rattled slightly, as though someone was testing it. My mind raced with questions. Who could it be? Why were they here? I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but the rules screamed at me to keep quiet. The rattling stopped, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then came the knock. It was soft, almost polite, but it echoed through the room like a gunshot. My pulse pounded in my ears as the knock came again, followed by a voice. "Let me in," it said, low and raspy. "I need help." The voice wasn't familiar, but something about it felt off. It was too calm, too calculated, as though it wasn't asking for help, but demanding it. I clutched the edge of the blanket, willing myself to stay silent. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Please," the voice begged. "It's cold out here." The doorknob rattled again, harder this time, and I squeezed my eyes shut. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was absolute, suffocating, as though the resort itself was holding its breath. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, staring at the door and waiting for something to happen. When morning finally came, I unlocked the door and peered into the hallway. It was empty, but something on the carpet caught my eye. A single wet footprint leading away from my room. The rules weren't just eccentricities. They were the only thing keeping me alive. The wet footprint haunted me all morning. It led down the hallway and disappeared near the elevator, its edges smeared as though something had dragged it away. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the memory of the voice and the knocking lingered, gnawing at my nerves. By the time my next shift began, I was on edge. The list of rules sat on the desk, and I read them over and over, the words now etched into my mind. I couldn't ignore them anymore. They weren't just precautions, they were survival guidelines. The night started quietly, as it always did. The empty halls stretched endlessly before me, illuminated by dim, flickering lights. The pool, glimmering faintly in the moonlight, was still and silent, its surface reflecting the starry sky. It felt like the calm before a storm. Around 1:30 a.m., I was making my rounds near the lobby when I heard it. Footsteps. They echoed faintly from the upper floor, deliberate and heavy, like boots striking the carpeted floor. My chest tightened as I remembered the rule. If you hear footsteps in the hallway, remain silent. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to retreat to my room, but something about the sound drew me in. The footsteps weren't coming toward me. They were heading to room 217, my room. Curiosity clawed at me. I should have stayed where I was, but the unanswered questions were too much to bear. Who, or what, had been outside my door the night before? And why had it left that single footprint? Against my better judgment, I stepped into the stairwell and climbed to the second floor. The footsteps had stopped by the time I reached the hallway, but the air felt wrong, charged with a heavy silence. My flashlight flickered, its beam casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. As I approached room 217, my heart pounded in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, the faint sound of breathing emanating from inside. I swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tightly, and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was untouched, the desk exactly as I had left it. But the air was ice cold, and a faint, sour smell lingered. I stepped inside, shining the flashlight around. My pulse quickened when the beam landed on the carpet near the window. There, in the exact spot where I had stood the night before, was another footprint, wet and glistening, as though it had just been made. My breath hitched as the door slammed shut behind me. The sound reverberated through the room, and I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Why did you come back?" a voice whispered. I froze. The voice was low and raspy, the same one I had heard outside my door. But this time, it didn't come from the hallway. It came from inside the room. I turned slowly, the beam of my flashlight landing on the mirror above the desk. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't alone. Behind me, a figure loomed. Tall, dark, and featureless, its presence suffocating. The rules screamed in my mind, but it was too late. I had broken the most important one. Do not leave your room after 2 a.m. The figure moved closer, its shadow stretching across the room. I stumbled back, my hand fumbling for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, and the sour smell intensified, filling my lungs like smoke. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said again, louder this time. The flashlight flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, thick and suffocating. My flashlight refused to turn back on, leaving me clutching it like a lifeline. The cold in the room deepened, cutting through my clothes and numbing my fingers. I could feel the presence, heavy, watching, waiting. The voice came again, echoing from every corner of the room. "Why did you come back?" it asked, each word dripping with accusation. I stumbled backward, my hand fumbling along the wall for the light switch, but there was nothing. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of the situation. The rules had been clear, yet I'd ignored them, and now I was paying the price. The mirror above the desk flickered, catching my attention. It no longer reflected the room, but instead showed a corridor I didn't recognize. The walls were dark and pulsing, like veins under translucent skin, and a figure stood at the far end, motionless but unmistakably alive. The reflection's perspective shifted, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was looking through the eyes of whatever was standing behind me. The voice spoke again, softer now. "You broke the rules. You let us in." Panic surged through me, and I turned sharply, swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The beam flickered back to life for a split second, illuminating an empty room. The presence was gone, or so I thought. The door slammed open, and the hallway beyond twisted unnaturally, its walls curving and stretching as though the resort itself was alive. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating in my chest and making my ears ache. Shadows danced along the walls, moving in unnatural patterns. I bolted into the hallway, my heart pounding. The air was thick, almost tangible, and every step felt like I was wading through water. The lights flickered wildly, casting distorted shapes that seemed to reach for me. The corridor stretched endlessly, and no matter how far I ran, the stairwell never got closer. Behind me, I heard the footsteps again, heavy and deliberate, echoing in perfect rhythm with my own. I didn't dare look back, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right on top of me. "You can't leave," the voice whispered, so close it felt like it was inside my head. I skidded to a stop as the hallway shifted before my eyes. The walls began to close in, and the floor tilted upward, forcing me to stumble backward. The corridor was no longer linear. It twisted and spiraled, defying logic. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was being guided somewhere. The pool. I emerged into the outdoor courtyard, where the still water of the pool reflected the night sky like a sheet of glass. The air was colder here, and the hum from the hallway had grown into a deafening roar. Shadows moved beneath the water, dark shapes writhing just below the surface. Never go near the pool at night, the rule warned. But I was already there. The footsteps stopped behind me, and I turned slowly. The figure was there, tall and featureless, its outline flickering like a dying light bulb. It raised a hand, pointing toward the pool. "You must restore balance," it said, the voice hollow and resonant. I shook my head, taking a step back. "I don't understand," I stammered. "What do you want?" The figure tilted its head, and the water in the pool began to churn. A shape rose from the depths, massive and grotesque, its surface glistening in the moonlight. It was formless, shifting constantly, and its presence radiated malice. The figure gestured again, and I understood. The resort wasn't just abandoned. It was a prison, and I had broken the chains. The rules weren't arbitrary. They were the locks. And now, the thing in the pool was free. The figure stepped closer, its outline growing sharper. "Restore the balance," it said again. And I realized what it meant. I had to choose. Run and let the entity escape, or sacrifice myself to seal it away. The figure's command echoed in my mind. Restore the balance. I stared at the churning water in the pool, its surface alive with writhing shapes, and felt the crushing weight of the choice before me. Whatever I had unleashed wasn't human, or even close to it. If I ran, it would escape. If I stayed, I wasn't sure what would happen. The figure took a step closer, its presence suffocating. "You broke the rules," it said, the hollow voice layered with tones that didn't belong to a single throat. "You must fix what you've done." My flashlight flickered, the beam casting erratic shadows over the courtyard. I tightened my grip on it, my fingers trembling. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why this place?" The figure tilted its head, as though considering my question. "This place is a boundary," it said. "The rules keep the boundary intact. When they are broken, the boundary fails." The words hit me like a blow. The resort wasn't just abandoned. It was a barrier, a thin veil keeping whatever was in the pool locked away. And now, because of my ignorance, that barrier was crumbling. The figure extended its hand, pointing to the pool. "Step forward," it commanded. The water surged, and from its depths emerged a shape that defied comprehension. It was vast, shifting and grotesque, its surface a kaleidoscope of shimmering darkness. It had no eyes, but I could feel it watching me, its malice radiating like heat. I stumbled backward, my legs threatening to give out. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't do this." The figure's voice grew sharper. "If you do not, it will escape. The choice is yours, but the consequences are not." Tears burned in my eyes as I looked at the pool. The air around me felt heavier, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. I had broken the rules. This was my fault. With trembling steps, I approached the edge of the pool. The water churned violently, and the entity within seemed to react to my presence, its form shifting more rapidly. My heart pounded as I stood at the edge, staring into the abyss. "What happens if I go in?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You restore the balance," the figure replied. "The boundary holds. The rules remain." "And me?" The figure didn't answer. I took a deep breath, my hands clenching into fists. There was no escaping this, no other way to fix what I'd done. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the churning water drown out my thoughts, and stepped forward. The cold hit me like a shock, stealing the breath from my lungs. The water pulled at me, dragging me down with an almost sentient force. I fought the urge to panic, forcing myself to stay still as the darkness enveloped me. The last thing I saw before the water closed over my head was the figure, standing motionless at the edge of the pool, watching. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the pool anymore. I was back in room 217, lying on the bed. The air was calm, the resort eerily silent. My flashlight was on the desk, its beam steady and strong. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. Then I saw the list of rules. They were different now. Do not leave your room after 2 a.m. If you hear footsteps in the hallway, remain silent. Do not use the elevator between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Never go near the pool at night. If anyone knocks on your door after 2 a.m., do not open it. Maintain the boundary. The last rule sent a chill through me. I understood now. The resort wasn't just a prison, it was my prison. I was part of it, bound to the rules I had broken. The balance had been restored, but at a cost. The days blurred together after that night. I performed my duties as though nothing had changed, but I knew better. The resort wasn't just a job anymore, it was a sentence. I was its warden now, bound by the rules I had broken. The guests never came, the phone never rang. Pine Hollow Resort remained as empty as the day I arrived, but the silence no longer unnerved me. It felt alive, watching, waiting for another crack in the boundary. Every morning, I checked the pool. The water was still, its surface reflecting the pale sky like a mirror. But beneath that calm exterior, I knew it was still there. The entity I had sacrificed myself to contain lingered in the depths, its presence a constant weight in the air. The rules were my anchor. I recited them daily, their words etched into my mind. Do not leave your room after 2 a.m. If you hear footsteps in the hallway, remain silent. Do not use the elevator between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Never go near the pool at night. If anyone knocks on your door after 2 a.m., do not open it. Maintain the boundary. The last rule haunted me. I didn't know what maintaining the boundary truly meant, but I felt its weight in everything I did. It was in the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the lights, the faint vibration in the walls. The boundary was everywhere, and I was its keeper. Weeks turned into months, and the isolation became routine. I stopped questioning the rules and simply followed them. The footsteps in the hallway no longer frightened me, and the knocking at the door felt like a part of the rhythm of the resort. Then, one day, it changed. I was walking through the lobby when I saw it, a car in the parking lot. It was the first sign of life I'd seen since my arrival, and it filled me with a mix of hope and dread. A young man stepped out, clutching a duffel bag and looking around nervously. He was just like me when I arrived, unsuspecting, unaware of what he was stepping into. I waited at the desk as he entered, his footsteps hesitant on the marble floor. "Hi," he said, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "I'm here about the job?" I nodded, handing him the clipboard with the contract. My voice felt foreign as I spoke, hollow and detached. "Sign here." He frowned but signed the paper, his hand hovering over the final line. "Are there rules?" he asked, his tone uneasy. I slid the list across the desk, watching as he scanned it. His eyebrows furrowed, but he didn't ask any questions. No one ever did. "Room 217, I said, handing him the key. As he disappeared up the staircase, I felt the boundary shift, its hum faint but familiar. The cycle was beginning again. The resort would test him as it had tested me, and if he failed, he would join me in maintaining the balance. The boundary demanded it. The knocking started again that night, and so Pine Hollow Resort remains. A prison, a test, and a boundary. The rules are absolute, and those who break them pay the ultimate price. The cycle never ends.